Are the Detroit Lions the best team in the NFL? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the return of Tua. We're going to talk about the Eagles and much, much more here on RotoViz Overtime as we continue to dissect the Week 8 matchups and look ahead to the rest of the season. Hopefully you all got over the line, got a W in Week 8. Shawn, this happens when you're in a lot of leagues. You're in one league where you're like, oh, really need to see, CeeDee Lamb have a big week this week. And then, like me and you, we have a main event where we're faced off and we get crushed by CeeDee Lamb over there. There's always that balancing act when there's a lot of different leagues, but that's part of the aspect that also makes it fun. You're always trying to tread that needle. Shawn, a team that is treading the needle, they are smashing everybody in the face, and then they are going on to win all these games, is the Detroit Lions. They get a win this week. The win, I think, was never in doubt. They're playing the Titans at home. Always expected them to go and get the win. They're 6-1 on the season now. The Titans are 1-6. It was a Mason Rudolph led team, but some of the stuff that you just have to look through here. We get Jared Goff, Shawn, 52 points scored by the Detroit Lions, 85 yards passing from Jared Goff, which is pretty incredible. He does have the 3 passing touchdowns, which is obviously fantastic for him and his managers in this particular one. We get Sam LaPorta. He gets a receiving touchdown in this one. Surely that's from Jared Goff. No, that one was from David Montgomery, who had a passing touchdown in this one as well. 1 of 1 for 3 for a perfect passing day from Montgomery. He gets in the end zone as well. He has 9 rush attempts, 33 rushing yards and a touchdown. He also has 1 for 5 through the air. But Jahmyr Gibbs, Shawn, 11 carries, 127, 1 touchdown. One of those being a 70-yard rush all the way to the end zone. Nobody was catching him there. Because of the game script, both of the running backs, just the 1 target, 1 reception each. You get 6 yards there. We get Amon-Ra St. Brown gets 2 targets, 7 yards, 1 touchdown. We'll talk about that in a moment because some of the usage around St. Brown, and I guess we can say game script as well, but 2 targets, and one of those targets, as I'll talk about in a moment, came after a touchdown was overturned and then led to him getting his particular touchdown there. Brock Wright gets in the end zone, 1 target, 1 reception, 8 yards. Khalif Raymond gets in the end zone. He also had, you touched on this, Shawn, on the show earlier this week. He did have a return touchdown, but had a receiving touchdown as well, 2 for 14 and a touch. And Sam LaPorta leading the way, doubling everyone else in targets overall. 6 targets, 6 receptions, 48 yards, and 1 touchdown for him on National Tight Ends Day. But some numbers, Shawn, for the Lions in terms of, looking through the team of Montgomery and Gibbs. And obviously we would like Montgomery to get less touchdowns, but he's having a fantastic run here with the Lions. They've played 19 games that they've both been active. They've scored 27 total touchdowns. Montgomery has 19, Gibbs has 16. So, you mentioned a number of times the best backfield in the NFL. They're having a dominant run here. I mentioned the touchdown for Amon-Ra St. Brown. That was one that Sam LaPorta was originally called a touchdown, then marked at the 1-yard line, ended up being a touchdown to Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I mentioned the passing yards, and you're wondering, how is there so many points put up with those passing yards? Shawn, in the first half, the Lions had 133 yards total offense. They had 146 return yards. And then shortly after that, they returned another one for 90 yards and a touchdown. So early in the third quarter, they had 236 return yards in this one. So it really special teams dominated the Lions, as they have been recently. There was a couple of trick plays in there, trying to get different people, in on the action, trying to get them in the end zone, and then obviously get the David Montgomery passing touchdown. On the other side, 20 carries for Tony Pollard for 94 yards. He was the entirety kind of off. Julius Chestnut was there too, but he led the backfield with Tajay Spears out. Calvin Ridley, though, Shawn, somebody who we did talk about post DeAndre Hopkins and how that offense would work. Well, there's 38 pass attempts here. 15 of them go to Calvin Ridley. 15 targets, 10 receptions, 143 yards. Did have 100 yards in the first quarter of the game. So after that, obviously, it did slow down a bit. And I have to say, in that first quarter, I thought Mason Rudolph looked pretty good at that portion. But, obviously, the Lions, got to grips with them as the game went on, and they went 52 14 in this game. Felt like it could have been whatever score the Lions wanted. They didn't score in the fourth quarter in this one. Neither did the Titans. So lots to talk about here in this one. Obviously, the Gibbs performance is very, very strong. Special teams performance is great. Any concerns with Amon-Ra St. Brown and his kind of current usage, or do you think that was just like this game? We don't. I think that like the Lions like to can we get a offensive lineman a touchdown? We'll try that instead. Like I don't think they're a team where they're really trying to force feed players the ball when the game is completely out of hand. But what they will do is like feed somebody who's never caught a reception before to try and get them in the end zone. That's kind of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, the last 4 weeks, they won 42-29 against the Seahawks, 47-9 against the Cowboys, 31-29 in the comeback victory against the Vikings, and then 52-14 yesterday. 2 of those 4 games on the road, 3 of the 4 games against at least decent opponents. Colm, in many of these cases, if they weren't winning in such massive blowouts, they could have put up many more points. The issue that the Lions are having in some ways here for people like Amon-Ra is simply that you don't need to play a fourth quarter of the game. That's been a little bit of an issue for Jared Goff. Goff, I made the case last week, is the current NFL MVP. I do think that right now is even fairly clear cut. They're just so good. I mean, it's going to be a problem for Amon-Ra when you have those 2 running backs, because you can be very effective down by the goal line. If anything, it could get worse, because I mean, you had like a 6-inch line score for Amon-Ra, where the vast majority of cases that's going to be a score for one of the running backs.
That's true.
I mean, this is a game in which Jameson Williams doesn't play. It was sort of amusing because you kind of think to yourself, well, if they don't have their emerging superstar receiver, one of the fastest players in football, former first-round pick, then just throw for 80 yards and still score 52 points.
And the other thing, just with the offense, Shawn, you mentioned our MVP chat last week. Jared Goff, the efficiency that he has shown, I mentioned he only had 85 yards. He's 12 of 15 and he has 3 touchdowns. And then now he does take 4 sacks for 33 yards, but they are being extremely efficient. And then when, if you have a running back who breaks off a 70-yard rush, the opportunities become less for those receivers as well, not just outside of when you're into the 5-yard line.
Exactly. So you're hoping that 70-yard score, what it does is it fuels scoring, because so much of the time, and one of the things that happened yesterday for Brock Bowers was that the Chiefs managed to take their dear sweet time scoring and essentially had the ball the entire second half. Well, if you're playing against that, then you simply are not on the field, right? You had a 70-yard score and you're thinking, okay, well, that's good for the Titans players. It's going to be good for Calvin Ridley. Maybe they'll feel the pressure to go score. Maybe the Lions defense without Aiden Hutchinson will give up some more points. Then you come back with Amon-Ra. The thing that's nice is that isn't like 15 combined carries for Gibbs and Montgomery to go the 70 yards. Just one play. Yep. The problem, again, is you blow these teams out. Now, the next couple of weeks are going to be Packers. They're going to be Texans. You wouldn't expect those games to be blowouts. You'd expect them to be more like the 31-29 victory against the Vikings. But my contention would be that Vikings game was about the best case scenario for the Vikings. Now, Vikings fans are going to say, well, the best case scenario would have been that we have also one of the better teams of football and we're at home and the Lions made some key mistakes. Would have been winning. But even with the key mistakes that the Lions made, they're still able to come through. With the questions around Jordan Love, with the way that the Texans are playing on offense, I guess I do expect the Lions to blow both of those teams out. Now, we do know what happens when you start to expect things, just in general in life, but certainly in the NFL, you get some contrary examples that remind you that anything can happen pretty quickly. But the Lions are just so potent at this point. And one of the things that you get when you run all of these trick plays is simply the defense continues to have to account for everything. We gave JSN a little bit of a hard time for throwing a Russell Wilson type pass to DK Metcalf last week. David Montgomery looked like he could play quarterback. It's like, you want to throw that play in a few more times. He looked good. He threw, I mean, they're in there, in the green zone, but he threw a little rocket in there to Sam LaPorta. That play looked good, and it was obviously fun. He only gets the 33 yards in this game, 38 if you want to include the reception, and still gets multiple touchdowns. So you cannot hold David Montgomery down. Colm, I do think Jahmyr Gibbs is the only player in football who scores on that 70-yard touchdown. When you have unique traits, you get unique outcomes.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit, about Bijan on the show on Monday, and that was, something that we talked about is that kind of speed. But Shawn, when he got to the edge there, like I know sometimes when you see a player out there, you're like, will he get in? Won't he get? It was like, he's 50 yards to go. It's over. So that was obviously nice to see him, because he has been very, very close on a number of occasions this season to doing that. And, he maybe just gets a little neck and he trips over. He gets a little bit of contact with that one all the way to the end zone. Somebody, Shawn, who has been nicked up all season long, really, but has got back in the starting lineup at this particular present moment in time is Tua. He is in a situation here where it feels like they, could go and win this game, should go and win this game because he's back. You feel like maybe there's some momentum there. They lose to a last-second field goal to the Cardinals, who are now 4-4. The Miami Dolphins are 2-1 on the season. I thought Tua played pretty good in this, 28 of 38 for 234 and a touchdown. Does have 3 rushes, Shawn, for 13 yards. One of those being a 13-yard rush. And when he's rushing out there, I'm sure everyone watching was like, please slide down, please slide down. He does avoid contact on that particular one. This game, though, kind of showed offensively the difference between having somebody who has a starting level quarterback in the NFL and not having it, based on how they were able to move the ball. Very effective rushing day for them with 25 attempts in total for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Devon Achane has 97 yards and 10 carries, one of those being a 47-yard run. Mostert, Shawn, just has 9 carries for 19 yards, but 2 of those 4 touchdowns, which obviously if you're an Achane owner would be very frustrating, because he has 8 targets for 6 receptions, 50 yards and a touchdown of his own, a nice screen pass that he takes into the end zone. So Achane has a big day, which could have been monstrous, but Mostert gets in to the end zone twice to continue his kind of streak of trying to get in there. Not as much from Waddle as we might have wanted to see, as we move forward here. He does get 6 targets in terms of the overall share. That is fine. Jonnu Smith has 6 targets. Tyreek Hill, Shawn, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 72. I guess the part that you're probably going to want to talk about is going to be on the other side, and Trey McBride. But I did think this Dolphins offense looked to be kind of, could have been better, but also was much, much better than it has been over the last couple of weeks. They did have a lot of fumbles in this one. 2 fumbles at 3 times. They recovered 1 of them. Julian Hill also had 1 fumble. Kyler Murray had a fumble of his own on the other side, but the turnover battle here not going in the favor of the Dolphins, and then they have the 1-point loss at the end. Kyler Murray, though, Shawn, I did sit Kyler Murray for a few returning to teams this week. Murray has 26 of 36, 307, and 2 passing touchdowns, just 19 yards on the ground on 5 carries. Murray has looked relatively good. It's kind of feels like it's a bit more up and down, and he's got saved a couple of times by long rushing touchdowns, but this game felt more repeatable, I guess I would say, as they move forward. The other part of that being positive for them was Marvin Harrison, in terms of he had 7 targets, 6 receptions, 111 yards and a touchdown. I thought they used him much better in this in terms of the routes they were trying to get him to do, the way they used him across the field. And I also think that this was probably the best performance in terms of his consistency throughout a game for Harrison. So he is a big day. That is also a big day for Trey McBride. 11 targets, 9 receptions, 124. No touchdowns, but has a nice day. And if you look then throughout the rest of the team, Michael Wilson has 6 targets, 5 for 31 and a touchdown for him. Those were the 3 leading ways in the receiving game. Overall, Shawn, I think a pretty impressive result on the road here for the Cardinals, and more so an offensive structure that I think they could maintain as they look to move forward here, versus what, like, one of my criticisms of Murray has been those first 15 scripted plays, pretty good generally. After that, then, adapting to the game situation has not been good. But now they get the Bears, the Jets, the Seahawks, and then the Vikings, back to the Seahawks, and the Patriots and the Panthers. Like, there is a chance here that over the next kind of 6-7 games that they could pile up a couple of wins and put themselves, firmly in that playoff picture. So is there, some shoots here of positivity for the Cardinals moving forward? I think it's leading in that direction for me.
Yeah, I think you've got to be excited that you win a game that you shouldn't have won. You win it on the road. You get back to 500. Your quarterback looks good. Your supposed generational receiver selection looks good. There's still a lot of weaknesses here. Came into this game with very poor defensive metrics. But you mentioned all the things with Murray just get sliced and diced and put up no hurdle at all for Tua and those running backs.
The only hurdle in this game, Shawn, was Trey McBride.
There you go. The issue that we got with Tua that cost him the game was handling the snaps. It was also a big issue for Geno Smith. It's easy to say that Seahawks game, none of the stuff was going to ever make a difference. The Seahawks were in that for a long time before their critical mistakes just piled up and piled up and piled up. You have to be able to snap the ball to your quarterback. There were more mistakes with the shotgun snap this week than I can ever remember. We also had a few key mistakes on pitch plays where, those always look tricky to me. You think about how difficult it is to recover a fumble, for example. You think about how easy it is to drop a pass. Pitches are different. They obviously have a much lower rate of problem, and yet when the mistakes come, they're not actually that surprising when you think of what's going on in the game here. This game changes when you get the safety, right? So
third quarter.
That makes everything different there. But the Dolphins came in, and some of this is probably based on what the opponent's needs have been, given how bad the Dolphins offense is. But the Dolphins passing defense has been one of the better ones in terms of limiting passing yards per play. It's been one of the best in terms of creating pressure. It's been one of the best in terms of limiting yards after the catch. For this to be the game, especially in a Cardinals road game, where Kyler Murray finally looks like the guy who could take you to the promised land and the guy who could unlock Marvin Harrison. This is, I think, a positive note. Again, we spent a long time in the first show of the week talking about Caleb Williams and how catastrophic everything was. A similar thing could be said about the Cardinals in terms of how well Kyler Murray was playing. And Kyler Murray's been in the NFL for a long time, so it's a much bigger deal in some ways for him. Now, for him, you do have him kind of locked into this range where he's put in enough NFL games that he's not going to be a straight bust. You also know that it's extremely unlikely he's going to be a straight star. And so the Cardinals are dealing with that sort of tighter range of outcomes. Whereas with the Bears, every game feels like the end of the world because Caleb Williams could be anything from a superstar to a bust. We don't have that tighter range of outcomes yet. This game here for the Cardinals within that tighter range is very encouraging for that organization because he looked like he could pass it okay. Now, there were plenty of plays, especially early, where you're like, he can't see over the line. He can't throw it over the line. Balls being knocked down, players being open, and he can't find them. But that turns. And in this game, you saw much more of what we anticipated coming into the season. And even though we were pretty skeptical about the Marvin Harrison price, we did say one of the reasons you love Trey McBride is going to be hard to stop both. Maybe they can both flourish together. It gives the defense a difficult question to answer if they're both going. And then we haven't gotten any of that. This was the first game where you get the 7 targets for Harrison, and he looks good throughout, right? It's not some fluky element where he gets to 111 yards because of a broken play. He's consistently gaining chunks all the way through.
Yeah, his longest play was 25. So, obviously building that out throughout it. Now, I just thought the way they used him was much better. The other thing, his touchdown reception was just a fantastic catch. He had another similar catch on the sideline as well. So I was very impressed with his performance after, being a bit frustrated just watching how he was playing. And I guess I've been frustrated with Kyler Murray and how the offense is playing, but this was maybe a step forward for them. But it could be one of those where it worked this week and next week then the game plan doesn't work against their opponents, but they have a positive kind of fixture or schedule coming up. You mentioned some of the issues with the snaps and Tua. They did have that safety in the third quarter, but in general, I think it was a big step forward for the Dolphins, and I would expect their offense to move forward in that kind of progression as we move forward. The disappointing thing, this is a crushing loss for them because, they've had to sit through a very disappointing run of results and performances where there wasn't much hope of anything. They get their quarterback back and then they lose this one with a dagger at the very, very end. So we'll see how the Dolphins react overall. Shawn, we talked a lot about the Philadelphia Eagles last week, but they go out again, get a win here. They're 5-2 on the season, 37 points on the board. The Bengals continue to have some of their issues. No T. Higgins this week, 3-5 on the season. The Bengals, Shawn, are 0-4 at home, which is, not ideal for them. We do get a Ja'Marr Chase touchdown early in this game, but not very much outside of that. He does get 9 receptions on 11 targets, just a 54 yards and 1 touchdown for him. Gesicki is heavily involved, 8 targets, 7 receptions for 73. Passing game around, that's a little bit mixed up. We do get Chase Brown, 12 carries for 31 and a touchdown, a short touchdown for him. His longest run of the game, Shawn, was 5 yards. Zach Moss's longest run of the game was 4 yards. He goes 5 for 11. So the running game, 20 for 58 and a touchdown. Not a lot going on there. The Eagles look like they're going to take a step forward here as an actual NFL team, and it's going to be just a little bit hard to balance it on a week-to-week basis from where it's going to go from a fantasy perspective. We've seen continuous usage of A.J. Brown, where he gets 84 yards, 5 receptions in this one. We've seen Devonta Smith get 7 targets, 6 receptions, 85 yards, and a touchdown leading the way. His 45-yard touchdown shot in this game was just, I typed out in my notes the word beautiful. In terms of the way he followed that ball over his shoulder and tracked it, we see a lot of players have major issues. And we did see that this week, not in the same way tracking the ball, but with Son in recent games. We've seen a few players. We've seen Rashad Bateman have an issue with one in that Baltimore game this week as well. But I thought Smith was looking great in this one. Grant Calcantara was in there, 3 targets, 3 receptions for 58. So, but outside of that, it was basically in the offense. It was, Devonta Smith, AJ Brown, which you kind of expect in this offense, getting a lot of the work. Just a 1 target for Saquon. Saquon has 22 carries, 108 on the ground. Jalen Hurts, Shawn, 10 for 37, 3 rushing touchdowns. He had 2 last week, so he has 5 rushing touchdowns in the last 2 games. I had kind of been talking at the start of the season about the way that they had, I was surprised in how they moved away from, the tush push or, trying to get Hurts into the end zone. Well, they have gone 100% back to what they were doing last year, and Hurts is taken into the end zone. So I'm sure that's frustrating for Saquon Barkley managers out there at the moment, but they're getting it done in different ways. And while it is a limited passing offense, it is also concentrated. So the 20 pass attempts and the 16 receptions, a lot of them go into the 2 guys that we want in Devonta Smith and AJ Brown. What were some of your takeaways from the Eagles and the Bengals here?
Well, I had made the claim that the Adam Troutman catch was the best catch of the weekend. It was fantastic. The Devonta Smith catch is a reminder that if he played in an offense that didn't have A.J. Brown and he played with a true passing QB, which, maybe that's a stipulation that just, if you give that to a whole host of receivers, they're going to be good. We don't have too many of those out there right now. you could probably make the case in a game where Jalen Hurts averages almost 12 yards per attempt that maybe Devonta Smith does have that. But he is one of the best receivers in football. I think his performance coming into this game had been justifiably frustrating because of just how good he is and what little they've been able to make of it. The thesis for both Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley coming into the season was tough because it was almost impossible for them to not cannibalize. And so then what you're really looking at is an Eagles offense that has to score a huge number of points. To an extent, they've done that. And so you're now getting the points that you need from Hurts. You are intermittently getting the points you need from Barkley. You take out some of the big runs last week against an atrocious New York Giants run defense. And the recent stretch has actually been pretty negative for Barkley. This was a game he needed to put up another 25 points because it is one of the easiest matchups in football. The Bengals, you mentioned the 0-4 at home. Again, referencing Blair's fantastic piece, you see that their pass defense doesn't create pressure. They give up a huge amount of separation. So not surprisingly, they do tend to get eviscerated by most opposing pass offenses. Their run defense, arguably even worse. They give up the second most EPA per rush. They give up a lot of yards over expected. They give up a lot of yards after contact. There were a couple of plays in this game where Barkley's signature explosion was very clear, and he almost breaks through. He almost averages 5 yards per carry. There's nothing about this performance that is any way problematic from a reality perspective. Barkley was very good, but it again shows you, why it can be tough for fantasy. Now, one of the things talked about a lot in the Zero RB universe last week is that his schedule is so good that you should probably be leaning into the structural problems. Now, because his name is Saquon Barkley and because he had the big week 1, which creates a very different kind of context around a player, you're probably not going to be able to acquire him. Despite the fact that from a profile perspective, this is the type of guy people should be saying, sell high, sell high, sell high, because these things, there are a lot of red flags. These things aren't sustainable. I think because of the schedule, you should be buying, but people aren't going to be selling, again, because of the name. This is the problem, though. You don't have receiving value in this offense, and this was yet another, the entire last month, they have appeared to go out of their way to make sure he doesn't score rushing touchdowns, which, if you don't have him, that's great. If you are a Barkley fan, you have him on your rosters. The fact that the Eagles have scored so many points and he's been so good, and they appear to want to make Jalen Hurts a fantasy weapon, that's frustrating, right? And this is basically, so he scores the same number of points in this game as Chase Brown, which, if you watch this game, that's not something a Saquon Barkley manager is going to be very happy about.
Yeah, the other part in this, Shawn, just a note again, sometimes it doesn't pop up in box scores if people aren't watching the full games. We did have Will Shipley getting the end zone, was called back for a holding penalty. We had a few different people this week with touchdowns that were then called back after the fact for things like that. So that was nice to see him get in the end zone, but disappointing to see it then get.
Colm, all of those back. Will Shipley best ball shares. He burst through. You're thinking, who is that back who looks big and fast and strong? That's Will Shipley penalty. Yeah. Colm, can we get the officials to put the flags in their pockets?
I don't know. Some of these games were dreadful. I think the Bills and the Seahawks may have broken some sort of record, certainly for this season, in terms of the amount of accepted penalties. But we might get to that game in a moment. I'm going to go a bit rapid fire here, Shawn, to see what thoughts you might want to share between a couple of these games, because it was not pretty for the New York Jets. They're now 2-6, as well as New England Patriots been 2-6. They lose this one. Aaron Rodgers has 2 passing touchdowns, but 17 of 28, 233. Breece Hall, 16 carries for 80 yards. Braylon Allen, 12 carries for 32 and a touchdown. Garrett Wilson, Shawn, does get the 113 yards on 5 receptions. Some really nice catches in there. And then Devonta Adams, 4 for 54. Tyler Conklin getting one of the touchdowns. Xavier Gibson getting the other one of those. Shawn, the new... I'm going to read this out because the Jets scored 20 or more points in this particular game. They committed 0 turnovers. They held their opponent under 250 yards of total offense. From 1940 until this game, teams with those metrics were 756-0, which is a lot of wins. But the Patriots obviously beat the Jets this week to make it 756-1. We did lose Drake May early in this one as well to a concussion in the second quarter. The other part, Shawn, that I would note in this for the Patriots side is obviously Ramondre Stevenson wasn't much involved in the previous game in London. I sat him in quite a few leagues this particular week, but he had 20 carries for 48, which isn't great, but he did get in the end zone twice. Drake May also had a 18-yard rushing touchdown, which was an impressive play. But overall, the Patriots get a win here somehow. Any thoughts on the Texans or the Patriots games here?
The Jets game can really only be explained by karma, right? I mean, if this were anyone else other than Aaron Rodgers, they would have won this game. This was one of a number of games where we're reminded that it's tough for receivers to change teams in the middle. We did get a couple of plays where DeAndre Hopkins does something for the Chiefs. Devonta Adams does draw 6 targets in this game. I believe, did Amari Cooper have a catch? He was the target on the one really negative play for Josh Allen.
1 catch for 3 yards, 2 targets.
Yeah, and I believe the other one was picked. Like I say, otherwise a flawless performance there for Josh Allen. I think the hardest part here, I guess, is just that the thing that has separated Allen and Jalen Hurts is their ability to do what they've done and not get hurt. Drake May has been among the most exciting young players in football. Pretty heartbreaking to lose him in this one. That's been kind of the theme. He was also in some lineups for us. You don't score a lot of points when you only throw 6 passes. This was a weird one for Breece Hall, where his rushing numbers are fine, but he gets stopped at the goal line, so then he gets vultured. They only get the 1 reception to him. That's where he's really flourished. And so to see him lose this one, the coaching here with the Jets, like everything about it, the situational tactics, the overall game plan, we're getting a little bit of a feel as Rodgers and Wilson work together more that the concerns about Wilson completely misplaced. He is a star. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you lose that game. The previous game, though, was a lot more interesting in terms of Colts, Texans. I think in defense of Anthony Richardson, a couple of those throws are really exciting. You get the big play. That's the thing people have talked about. You get the big play. You get the rushing value. You don't have to be that accurate. But what the stats said and what all of our college football analysts told us was that, yeah, you don't have to be that accurate, but there is a level at which below that you simply can't play. And this wasn't a thing where you go 10 for 32 and you know that basically there weren't hot stretches, and there weren't. I believe at one point he was 4 for 17. The biggest takeaway is probably that the Houston Texans at home still almost lost. This is a Houston Texans team that at 6-2 is not scary at all. They may be getting weaker in terms of their talent. They're not able to get Tank Dell involved. 4 for 31 and a touchdown. Yeah, you get barely bailed out from a fantasy perspective, but it's devastating that he's so far down the pecking order in targets. Hopefully there's a mild health element here where as that gets cleared up, as he plays more, they get things going. But right now it's an incredibly stark contrast between Dell and Josh Downs, where one of the issues for Downs has been usage, not just at the NFL level, but in college, where he's an underneath guy. And yet you watch him, and Josh Downs is an absolute superstar. He's yet another one of those players where if you were to stipulate if he played with a good passing QB, what would he be off to? He has the touchdown in this game. He has a 69-yard game. He has what would have been a second touchdown is overturned because he's like his shoulder is down at the 1-inch line.
Oh yeah, and a very good catch too. Obviously he's marked down, but like kind of going back ways towards the end zone. A very impressive play.
One of those plays that was similar to what we got from DK Metcalf a week ago, where in part you're thinking, well, it's because he's a big dude that DK Metcalf is doing that. Josh Downs like, no, I mean, it's athleticism, right? It's a willingness and ability to contort your body and to be flying backward through the air as you extend both hands, you make a play on the ball. It's going to be so inconsistent when the vast majority of passes are nowhere near the receiver. You're going to get games like what we saw from Michael Pittman. This was, again, the reason that we said Michael Pittman is not draftable at almost any price. Now, again, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. If you got Michael Pittman like in round 12, round 13, you'd be like, I'll go ahead and take the risk there. But, I mean, this is what was likely to happen. It wasn't the only thing that could have possibly happened. I don't know. I mean, the Colts are so close. You look at this game, and if Joe Flacco plays, they probably win pretty easily. It's a huge problem for them because if they had won this game and you win a road game against the Texans and you're both 5-3, then you are in fantastic shape. Losing this game, you lose, that portion of the tiebreaker. You go down 2. That's tough. You mentioned Jonathan Taylor looking good. He looked fantastic.
Yeah, the other note there, just to pair it together on Taylor and on Downs, that one where he is marked down at the 1-yard line, that leads to the rushing touchdown then for Jonathan Taylor. So there's a couple of plays like that on the day where the fantasy points were allocated in a slightly different direction based on some of those calls. Last 2 games, Shawn, to head on here before we wrap up, we get the Chargers and the Saints. I have to say, Justin Herbert, he does have 12 incompletions in this one, but I think with the pieces that are around him, he has played pretty well over the last couple of weeks here. They are now 4-3 on the season. He has 2 passing touchdowns, 279 yards. J.K. Dobbins has a rushing touchdown, 17 carries for 57, leads the backfield there. He also had 7 targets for 4 receptions and 11 yards, so not very productive, but leads the team in targets. The talking point here, Shawn's Lad McConkey, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 111 yards, 2 touchdowns, 60 yards of a long on one of those touchdowns. I have to say the first touchdown reception was pretty impressive from McConkey, and they obviously leads to a huge fantasy day for him. Chris Olave, Shawn, has one of his better days of the season, 14 targets, 8 receptions, 107 for him. Changes a quarterback overall. We had Jake Hayner in to finish the game. He goes 9 of 17 after Spencer Rattler went 12 of 24. So the quarterback situation until Derek Carr is back is not ideal. But they get a comfortable win, they being the Chargers, 26-8 in this particular game. The Bills then get a comfortable win on the road against the Seahawks in a game where you mentioned some of the handling issues. There's a snap in this that goes over Geno Smith's head that Kenneth Walker gets and gets it back to the line of scrimmage somehow. But I don't know if I've ever seen a snap from inside the 10-yard line goes far back out the field. But the Seahawks struggled mightily on offense throughout this game. But the Buffalo Bills did not. You mentioned the interception as well for Josh Allen, his first interception of the season. 2 passing touchdowns for him. James Cook gets in the end zone rushing twice. He has 17 for 111 on the ground. Then he goes 3 for 22 in the air. Dalton Kincaid gets a touchdown here, 4 for 31 on a touchdown on 7 targets. And then Keon Coleman, Shawn, and Khalil Shakir, both players who I think are kind of emerging as this offense feels like it's growing a little bit at the moment. Obviously, Amari Cooper has been received in a trade, but just the 2 targets, 1 reception for him. Shakir has 10 targets, 9 receptions, 107. A lot of kind of underneath stuff, but does have a long of 35. Keon Coleman, 7 targets, 5 receptions for 70 yards and a touchdown. Very, very strong competitive catch on the touchdown play. So Coleman is a player who, like, there's certain things you see and you're like, oh, that's amazing. And then there's other things and you're like, well, that looks really bad. But it feels like it's now starting to move more in the positive direction for him. Is this, like, what are you thinking of the Bills offense moving forward? I think this was just a terrible day all around for the Seahawks in general, but the Bills are starting to shape into, I think, a pretty interesting offense moving forward here.
Yeah, they look good. This is a Seattle Seahawks team that is a work in progress. They're at least a year away. But when you are the Bills, you love to see essentially all of your pieces work. James Cook, absolutely fantastic in this one, averages 6.5 yards per carry, gets the 2 touchdowns. They're able to do a ton underneath with Khalil Shakir. They're able to complement that with some more vertical play from Keon Coleman. And Coleman, a guy who, because of the size, has the ability to threaten down the field. He's also very good with the ball in his hands. That was one of the things that showed up in the numbers. The real question was, why is this guy unable to really command targets? And I think that you're seeing some of that still. And yet already I think we've gotten enough positive to be very enthusiastic about where he's going, especially connected to Josh Allen. A couple weeks ago, Blair and I received a trade in an RV Triflex League where it was Bucky Irving for Coleman, partly because of where we were positionally, but partly because already then you're just in a position where the receiver has the ability to rise so much more and to hold so much more for the long term. We went ahead and made that move. We're pretty excited about that, even though Irving had an excellent game. We sort of glossed over that when we broke down the Bucks portion of that one in the first show of the week. He looked really good again. Sometimes you get a trade where you have to give up somebody you like because your league mate has offered something valuable. You know, you're used to getting those messages where it's like, do you want 3 crappy guys for your good player, or do you want, a 2029 5th round conditional pick for a starter? And you're like, well, I think I'll turn that down. Sometimes you go ahead and you get a trade offer and you make the move, even if you give up something that you like. I think it's important to be open to that. Often when I send out offers that are pretty well balanced, if not overpays, because you have something that would work for both people, you get a little bit more, I think, tendency to reject simply because the mindset is that most trade offers are bad. Right. So you want to go ahead and work through that. You do have to understand that one of the reasons the player that you're making an offer for is on the team that you made the offer to is because they're high on that player. So you would expect them to have a pretty healthy valuation. Colm, this game ends up being a blowout. It probably was going to end up as a blowout regardless. There were a lot of questionable penalty calls. That made it a little bit weirder. It was nice to see Dalton Kincaid participate. He scores a touchdown. He also had a second end zone target that I believe was close. But in this one, in that late, mid to late first half, when the weather is starting to get a little bit tricky, the Seahawks are still in it. First and goal at the 2-yard line. Kenneth Walker does get stuffed. That's disappointing. The next play, they snap the ball way over Geno Smith's head. That's the one you kind of
almost
referenced.
like a punt.
It was, we love Kenneth Walker. Some of this, people are like, well, I can't believe that all the things happened this week. You'd be talking about this. Kenneth Walker sprints back to that ball, which again is like 20 yards back, grabs it on the run as opposed to covering it up, beats like 3 or 4 guys as he then wraps around. Kenneth Walker is not one to get downhill if there are 3 or 4 guys that you could beat running all the way around to their side of the field. So we know that's like his preference anyway. He picks that ball up, beats some guys to the outside, does get some of the yardage back. The next drive, they again are down there at the 1-yard line. You have 3rd and goal at the 1. Kenneth Walker again stuffed. So many opportunities for him in this game. They go 4th and goal. They hike the ball. Geno Smith gets his foot stepped on. He goes down.
Yeah.
You have those 2 drives back to back that dramatically change the game. And then you have a touchdown drive by the Bills where Josh Allen is running kind of in the clear, I believe, on a 3rd and long, and has the ball knocked away. The ball goes down. He's running. It hits his foot, and so he kicks it
beyond the line.
It so far down the field that his receiver who recovers it has a first down.
Yeah,
those 3 plays dramatically changed the outcome. The Seahawks were so bad in the second half that, again, I'm not saying that they would have won this game, but they could have been in a very different position at halftime, which would have changed tactics. They also just don't look very talented, especially when DK Metcalf is out. I think the tiny positive you would have in this game is simply that Jackson Smith and Jigba looked way better than Tyler Lockett. So that's something.
Yeah, those 3 plays that you mentioned were obviously all momentum swingers, but pretty wide. The other one was Josh Allen had that interception that we talked about, and they go for it in 4th down there. They don't get it either. So obviously you're kind of having a major momentum swing in one direction where you get a turnover deep in opponent territory, but you can't get any points off it. So yeah, interesting to look back on those particular key moments. But that is going to do it for this edition of RotoViz Overtime. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening in. You have already subscribed, but if you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button. Make sure you're listening on your favorite podcast app, or maybe you're watching over on YouTube. You can get these shows all a little bit earlier over on the podcast player, sometimes up to a day in advance. So make sure you are subscribed to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed. That is going to do it for this one. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter @OverTomorrow. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.